Most people hear FBI Cyber Division and picture someone in a hoodie hacking into mainframes while dramatic music plays in the background. The reality is closer to 12-hour shifts, cold coffee, and staring at packet logs until your eyes stop working. I'm a digital forensics analyst. My job is to follow data trails that other people think they've erased, reconstruct what happened after the damage is done, and make sure the evidence holds up in federal court. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make good television. But it keeps hospital networks from going dark, and it keeps children's medical records out of the hands of people who would sell them. I had been with the Bureau for 4 years when everything unraveled. Not because of anything I did wrong. Because I went home for a long weekend and made the mistake of assuming that the people who raised me understood the word private. My supervisor had approved remote access for the trip. I was 3 weeks into an active case, Operation Lighthouse, a ransomware network that had already taken down 2 regional hospital systems in the Midwest and was showing signatures of a third attack in preparation. The kind of work you don't just pause because it's a long weekend. I had a secure government laptop, encrypted VPN access, and written authorization to continue the analysis remotely. Everything was by the book. It always was with me. My family's house was in Dayton, Ohio. My mom still had the same beige carpet she'd had since I was 8. My dad still kept a jar of peanuts on the kitchen counter that nobody else ever touched. And my brother, who was 32 years old and still acted like he was 19, still thought that anything behind a closed door was automatically an invitation. He worked as a freelance photographer. Event shoots, some commercial work, the occasional wedding. He was good at it, genuinely talented, but he carried around this particular energy that made every conversation feel like he was waiting for you to be impressed by him. When I walked through the front door Friday evening, he was the first one I saw, sitting at the kitchen table with his girlfriend, scrolling through something on his phone. He looked up and grinned. There she is, our resident government spy. Analyst, I said, setting my bag down. Same thing. He leaned back in his chair. You still can't tell us what you actually work on, right? Still top secret? Still not top secret, I said. Still just not your business. His girlfriend smiled politely. She was new, maybe 3 months in, still learning the family dynamics. I didn't envy her the learning curve. Dinner that night was the usual combination of warmth and low-grade friction. My mom made pot roast and asked me if I was sleeping enough, eating enough, seeing anyone. My dad asked about my drive up and then went quiet in the comfortable way he always did once the food was on the table. My brother kept steering the conversation toward his latest shoot, a corporate event in Columbus that had apparently gone very well, and I let him have the room because it was easier than competing. After dinner, I helped clear the table and then told everyone I had a few hours of work to do. My mom frowned the way she always did. You work too much. You're going to burn out before you're 35. I told her I was fine, which was true, and that it would only be a couple of hours, which turned out to be optimistic. I set up in the guest room. Laptop on the desk, VPN established, encrypted environment loaded. The Lighthouse data was waiting where I'd left it. Packet captures from a compromised hospital server, time-stamped intrusion logs, a partial code signature I'd been trying to match to a known threat actor group for the past week. I got into it, and the hours moved the way they always do when the work has momentum. At some point, I heard my brother knock. I told him I was busy. He said okay, and walked away. I didn't think anything of it. I finished around midnight, shut the laptop, and went to bed. The next morning I woke up early and went downstairs to make coffee before anyone else was up. My dad was already at the table with the newspaper. We sat together for a while without talking, which was one of the things I liked best about being home. After a while I went back upstairs to check in on the case. The laptop was exactly where I'd left it, closed on the desk, but something was wrong. There was a coffee ring on the corner of the desk that hadn't been there the night before. Small, light, recent. I opened the laptop. The session had logged out automatically as it always did after an activity, but when I checked the system log out of habit, something stopped me cold. There had been a login attempt at 2:14 inches the morning. Biometric failed, then a manual password attempt. Then the system had locked. My stomach dropped. Someone had tried to get in. I went downstairs. My brother was in the kitchen making eggs, headphones around his neck, perfectly relaxed. I stood in the doorway for a moment before I said anything. Were you in the guest room last night? He turned around. Something crossed his face, too fast to read. I knocked earlier. You said you were busy. I mean, after midnight. He turned back to the stove. I was going to get a charger. I thought you were asleep. Did you touch my laptop? I looked at it for like 2 seconds. It was locked. I kept my voice even. Did you take any photos? He was quiet for half a beat too long. Kevin. I stepped into the kitchen. Did you photograph my screen? He set down the spatula and turned around. And the expression on his face was the same one he'd had when he was 17, and I'd caught him going through my room. Caught, but not quite sorry. It was locked. I couldn't see anything sensitive. You tried the password. I guessed a couple of times. It locked me out. Did you photograph my screen before it locked? Another pause. I took one picture of the login screen. I thought it was funny, all the government seals and the warning text. I sent it to my friend Tyler. He works in cybersecurity, he'd appreciate. I stopped listening after Tyler. Tyler worked at a private tech firm. Private network, private devices. The second a photograph of a federal government login portal hit a civilian's phone, it created a data trail that the Bureau's automated monitoring systems would eventually find, and depending on what metadata was embedded in that photo, what header information was visible in the background of the screen, what case identifiers had been on display when my brother leaned in for his late-night souvenir, the protocol was not something I could talk him out of. My hands were steady. I'd trained for this. Not this exact situation, but the emotional architecture of it, the moment when protocol stops being abstract and becomes something you have to do to someone you know. Tyler's last name, I said. Why? His last name, Kevin. Marsden. Tyler Marsden. Sarah, it was a photo of a login screen. You're overreacting. I'm not. I pulled out my phone and walked back upstairs. My supervisor's number rang twice before he picked up, which meant he was already at his desk even on a Saturday morning. I gave him the short version. Login attempt, failed biometric, manual password attempts resulting in lockout, photograph of the active government portal taken by a civilian and transmitted to a second civilian via personal messaging application. He was quiet for about 4 seconds. You're still at the residence? Yes. Don't move. Don't discuss any case details with anyone in the house. I'm initiating breach review. I sat on the edge of the guest bed after I hung up. The room was quiet. Outside, I could hear my mom moving around in the hallway, the familiar creak of the third floorboard. Normal Saturday morning sounds. The kind that don't know yet that something has changed. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Breach review confirmed. Field response dispatched. I was to remain available and not discuss the matter with household occupants. I came downstairs. My brother was still in the kitchen. His girlfriend had joined him. My mom was pouring coffee. It was a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning tableau, and I stood at the bottom of the stairs and knew it was about to end. Kevin, I said, you need to sit down. He looked at me. Why are you looking at me like that? Please just sit down. My mom turned from the counter. What's wrong? I didn't answer. I looked at my brother. The photo you took, the one you sent to Tyler, it's triggered a federal breach review. He stared at me. You're serious. What does that mean? His girlfriend asked. It means federal agents are on their way to this house, I said. It means everyone who was in this house last night and this morning will be interviewed. It means Tyler Marsden is going to have federal agents at his door within the hour. It means the photograph you thought was a funny thing to text your tech friend at 2 a.m. is now evidence in an active investigation. My brother's face went through several stages. Disbelief, then a flash of irritation, then something that looked like the beginning of fear. Sarah, it was a login screen. There was nothing on it. You don't know what was on it, I said quietly. You don't know what was in the background. You don't know what metadata was attached to the screenshot. You don't know what case indicators were in the interface. You guessed. You guessed and you were wrong. My mom set her coffee cup down very carefully. Allison. She caught herself. Old habit. Sarah. Surely this is something you can handle internally. It's already past that point, Mom. My dad appeared in the doorway from the living room. He read the room in about 3 seconds and went still. My brother stood up. I'll call Tyler. I'll tell him to delete it. That will make it worse, I said. Do not contact Tyler. Do not contact anyone. You're going to let them come here over a locked screen. Kevin. I stepped closer to him, keeping my voice low. I work on cases where people have died, where hospital systems went down, and patients lost access to critical care. The data on that laptop is related to an active operation targeting the group responsible. I don't know exactly what was visible when you took that photo. Neither do you. And neither of us gets to make that call unilaterally. That's why there's a protocol. He looked at me like I was someone he didn't recognize. The knock at the door came 40 minutes later. 2 agents in dark jackets, a third in plain clothes who introduced herself as the lead examiner for digital evidence review. My dad answered the door. My mom stood very still near the kitchen. My brother and his girlfriend were on the couch. The lead examiner came to find me immediately. She confirmed the breach code, took my statement, and collected my laptop and phone. Standard procedure. She told me I was to be treated as a cooperating officer and that I should avoid discussing case specifics with anyone outside the review team. My brother gave his statement in the living room while my mom hovered nearby asking questions that the agents answered in careful, abbreviated sentences. His girlfriend sat next to him with her hands folded, very quiet. My dad stood by the window and said nothing. One of the agents found me in the hallway afterward. He said Tyler Marsden's phone had already been flagged. The photograph had been received, opened, and within 40 minutes, forwarded. Tyler claimed he'd sent it to a colleague who he said would find the government portal design interesting. His colleague worked at a defense technology consulting firm. The examiner's face was very neutral when she told me that. Professionally neutral. The kind of neutral that means something is not good. I asked her, what firm? She told me it was called Meridian Integrated Systems. And then she told me that Meridian had been a contractor for a Department of Justice project 18 months ago. That during that contract, they had been flagged for a minor data handling incident that was reviewed and closed. I knew that flag. I had processed part of that review. I went outside to get some air. The agents had 2 vehicles on the street. A neighbor across the road was watching from behind her blinds. My mom came out behind me a few minutes later. Her voice was careful, the way it got when she was trying not to say the thing she actually wanted to say. You didn't have to escalate this. Yes, I did. She's your brother, she said, then corrected herself. He's your brother. That's not a variable in federal breach protocol. She wrapped her arms around herself. You sound like a manual. I know. You could have just talked to him. I looked at her. If I had, and it turned out that something in that photograph reached the wrong person, and someone got hurt because of it, would you feel better about the fact that I kept it in the family? She didn't answer. She went back inside. The agents wrapped up by early afternoon. Before they left, the lead examiner pulled me aside and told me that given the Meridian connection, the review had been escalated to the Cyber Division's field office in Cincinnati. I would be contacted within 24 hours for further debriefing. My remote access authorization was temporarily suspended pending review. My brother found me in the guest room after they left. He stood in the doorway. He didn't come in. How much trouble am I in? Depends on what they find on Tyler's phone, I said, and on what Meridian does with whatever they received. Tyler's a good guy. He wasn't trying to. I know he wasn't trying to, I said. That doesn't change what happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you didn't hesitate for a second, did you? It wasn't really a question. No, I said. He nodded once, slowly, like he was filing that away somewhere. Then he walked back down the hall. I drove to the Cincinnati field office Sunday morning. The debriefing took 4 hours. 2 analysts from the Cyber Division's internal review team asked me detailed questions about my remote work setup, my authorization chain, my awareness of any external interest in the lighthouse operation. I answered everything directly and completely. At the end of the session, one of them told me that the photograph had been more problematic than a simple login screen capture. In the background, partially visible, was a case reference identifier tied to Operation Lighthouse and a server address format that, to someone with the right background in federal IT systems, would confirm the Bureau was actively targeting a specific threat actor cluster. That information, the analyst told me, was now at Meridian Integrated Systems, and Meridian had a contact in Brussels. I sat with that for a few seconds. Then I asked the question I needed to ask. Was there any indication the compromise had been anticipated? Not my brother's specific action, but the general exposure of my remote access during the weekend trip. The analyst looked at me for a moment before answering. There had been, he said, an unusual query on my remote access credentials 2 weeks earlier. Someone inside the Bureau's network had pulled my active case assignment and my authorized travel dates. The query had been logged under a routine audit flag, which meant it hadn't triggered immediate review. I asked who had run the query. He told me he wasn't authorized to share that yet. I drove back to Dayton that evening. My brother was in the living room watching television. He muted it when I came in. His girlfriend was gone, I assumed, giving him space to deal with whatever the day had brought. They called me, he said. A federal attorney. They said I might be asked to provide a formal statement about my contact with Tyler. That's standard. They said Tyler's been cooperative, that he didn't know what he was forwarding. Probably true. He picked at the edge of the couch cushion. What about me? If you're cooperative and honest, and if nothing in that chain shows intent to share classified information, your exposure is manageable, I said. You made a bad decision. You didn't commit espionage. He looked at the television, not at me. I just thought it was funny, he said. The logo, the warning text, I wasn't trying to. He stopped. I know that doesn't matter. It matters to me, I said. It just doesn't change the protocol. He nodded. My mom appeared in the doorway. She looked at both of us, said nothing, and then went back to the kitchen. I returned to my apartment in Washington Monday morning. By Tuesday, I was officially on administrative review status. My credentials were suspended, my case files transferred, and my building access restricted to non-operational areas. The internal review team told me it was standard procedure during any breach investigation involving a bureau employee's residence. I understood that. I also understood that standard procedures have a way of calcifying into permanent records when the political pressure is high enough. The news found the story by Wednesday. Not my name, not my brother's, but the broad outline. FBI cyber analyst at Center of Data Breach Investigation. Family member implicated in transmission of case-sensitive information. The Bureau issued a statement that said very little in very careful language. My phone was full of messages I didn't respond to. A reporter from a local Ohio outlet who somehow had my personal number. 2 college friends who saw the coverage and were checking in. 1 blocked number that left a voicemail. You should have just let it go. I reported the voicemail to my review contact and moved on. 2 weeks into the administrative review, I was called back into the field office. The internal review team had made progress on the credential query. The analyst who had accessed my travel dates and case assignments from inside the Bureau's network had been identified. His name was Derek Holt, Senior Analyst, Cyber Division, 8 years with the Bureau. I had worked 3 cases with him in my first 2 years. He had taught me how to read certain packet signatures. He had attended my unit's holiday party and made a joke about the coffee that I still remembered because it was actually funny. He had been passing information about active cyber division operations to Meridian's Brussels contact for at least 14 months. My brother's photograph had not been an accident. Derek had known I was traveling. He had known my remote access was active. He had not counted on my brother's specific stupidity, but he had been watching for an opportunity, and my brother had handed him one without knowing it existed. The lead investigator explained it to me in a conference room with very clean walls. Derek had used the metadata in my brother's photograph to confirm the lighthouse operation's current phase and to verify a server address that Meridian's contact needed. 15 minutes after Tyler Marsden's colleague forwarded the image, Derek had initiated a remote access attempt on a secondary lighthouse server, using a credential set that had been partially reconstructed from data points Derek had collected over months. Without my brother's photograph, Derek would have needed more time. More time meant more risk of exposure for him. My brother's casual 2 a.m. souvenir had given Derek a window he needed. I sat very still while the investigator finished. Then I asked whether my brother was going to face federal charges. Unauthorized access to a federal computer system, the investigator said, was a serious matter. The transmission to Tyler Marsden, who then transmitted to a third party, created a documented chain. The federal attorney reviewing the case was prepared to offer my brother a cooperation agreement in exchange for a complete statement and a formal acknowledgement of the violation. I asked what acknowledgement meant in practical terms. Probation. No criminal record if the terms were met. A substantial fine. I asked about Tyler. Similar terms. Tyler had already accepted. I drove to Dayton that weekend and told my brother in person. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting, which was not something he typically did. My mom stood near the counter. My dad sat at the far end of the table and held his coffee cup in both hands. When I finished, my brother was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I handed someone a weapon. You didn't know that. I handed someone a weapon, he said again, as if he needed to say it twice to make it real, because I was being an idiot at 2 in the morning. Yes. He rubbed his face. My mom made a small sound. My dad put his coffee cup down. The deal, my brother said. I should take it. Yes. And Derek. He's in custody. He'll face federal charges. My brother looked at me. If I hadn't taken that photo, you would have caught him anyway. Eventually. Probably, I said. Eventually. But the hospital systems might have had more time to protect themselves. Might not have. We'll never know exactly. He nodded. He looked older than he had a month ago. Not in a bad way. In the way that people look when something has moved through them and left the weight of it behind. My mom came over and put her hand on his shoulder. She looked at me, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something that would require me to answer carefully. But she just nodded, once, and went back to the counter. Derek Holt was indicted 6 weeks later. The indictment covered 14 months of unauthorized data transmission, 4 separate counts of compromising active federal operations, and 1 count related to the secondary access attempt during the Lighthouse breach window. The Bureau's press office issued a statement that praised the internal review process and said nothing specific about how the breach had been discovered. My clearance was reinstated 3 months after the review began. The finding was that I had followed all required protocols, that my remote access had been properly authorized, and that the breach had originated with an insider actor using my family member's unauthorized action as a vector. The reinstatement letter was 1 paragraph. It arrived in my email on a Tuesday morning while I was eating cereal. I went back to work. My desk was where I'd left it. My access was restored. The Lighthouse case had moved to a different phase during my absence, and I was brought up to speed in a 2-hour briefing that felt both familiar and slightly foreign, the way a room feels when you've been away from it long enough. Some of my colleagues treated me normally. A few were careful around me in the way that people are careful around someone who has become associated with a complicated event, even when the event wasn't their fault. One of the analysts who had been close with Derek said nothing to me directly but stopped meeting my eyes in the hallway. I let it go. My brother texted me the day he signed the cooperation agreement. Single message. Done. I texted back 1 word. Good. He sent back a thumbs up, which was as close to a flag of truce as either of us was likely to manage for a while. A few weeks later, he sent a longer message. I've been thinking about what you said, about protocol not being personal. I think I always assumed that when it came to family, you'd find a way to handle things differently. Like there was a version of the rules that had exceptions for people you knew. I didn't understand that the rules being the same for everyone is actually the point. I'm not saying I liked it. I'm just saying I get it now. I'm sorry I gave him the window. I know that wasn't on you. I read it twice, put my phone in my pocket, and went back to work. I stayed with the Bureau for another year after that. The Lighthouse case reached its conclusion. 2 members of the ransomware network were extradited and indicted. The hospital systems that had been targeted implemented updated protections. It was the kind of ending that doesn't feel like an ending because there's no moment when someone says well done and hands you something. You just move to the next file. I left on my own terms, eventually. Not because of what had happened, not exactly, though it would be dishonest to say the experience left no residue. I left because I had been offered a position with a nonprofit digital security organization that worked directly with under-resourced hospital systems, the specific population I had spent 4 years protecting from a distance. It felt like a shorter distance. My mom called when I told her about the new job. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. She said it sounded like I was giving something up. I told her I was trading one form of the same work for another. She said she still thought I worked too much. I told her that was probably true. My brother called the same week. He was working a long-term project photographing veteran stories for a documentary series. He said he thought I might want to be interviewed at some point as someone who had served in a different way. I told him I'd think about it. There was a pause, the comfortable kind. You doing okay? He asked. Yeah, I said. Are you? Getting there, he laughed a little, slowly. We talked for a while about nothing important, his project, my new job, whether our dad's birthday was the 14th or the 15th. At some point, I realized we had been on the phone for 40 minutes, which was longer than we had talked in probably 2 years. After I hung up, I sat for a while in my apartment with the window open. Traffic noise, somewhere a dog barking, the ordinary Tuesday evening sounds of a city that had no idea what had moved through my life over the past year. I thought about Derek Holt teaching me how to read a packet signature in a conference room that smelled like printer toner. I thought about my brother standing in the guest room doorway, younger somehow than his 32 years. I thought about a photograph taken at 2 a.m. for no reason except that it seemed funny at the time. The work I had done was real. The damage that had been done around it was also real. Both things stayed true at the same time, the way they always do when you're involved in something large enough to be consequential. There's no version where all the costs get balanced out. There's just the ongoing fact of what you chose and what it meant, and whether, when you got to the end of it, the choice still held up. For me it did. That was the only answer I had. Not a comfortable one, not a triumphant one. Just the plain, stubborn truth that when it had mattered, I had done what I said I would do, and that was going to have to be enough. Because it was all there was.